Okay. Perspective project. It's listed as space/perspective. It's more of a perspective and space in relationship to that than it is like the negative space project that we had, or the first project with shapes that was positive and negative space. So we're going to be learning the elements of perspective and how to create depth in a two-dimensional surface with the tricks of perspective. Our vocabulary is the horizon line, the vanishing point, 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, overlapping forms, atmospheric perspective. And I don't have it listed, but we'll be learning about isometric perspective too. So just like every other thing, we're going to be doing thumbnails today. I would avoid super complex images. Often what's kind of used for these as demos is like cityscapes. I would kind of avoid that too. One, because they don't make great compositions in terms of perspective. They're pretty boring, and it's not that much more difficult to make interesting composition, still using perspective, but just using all kinds of different shapes, because we want to focus on composition still. So hard stars, all that stuff. Avoid complex images. You can also use value. Oh, color should not be on there. Shape. Pattern, maybe. But there'll be a few other things that kind of fit into this too that can be used. And then for the project, we'll be doing 14 by 16. And it'll be graphite or charcoal if you want. I would say graphite. It's just going to be a little bit easier and a little bit cleaner. If you want to add in some value with charcoal, that would be good to do afterwards, but I would use kind of graphite as the primary. Yeah, cool. Oh, and this is due on the 15th. So today, Wednesday, Monday, and Wednesday of next week, you have work days, and then the Monday after next week is when it's due. And then we'll start on the final project. That'll be fun. So for perspective, the horizon line is pretty easy. We all know it as kind of the line where things are moving back in space. Towards that horizon line, things start to get smaller and disappear, and closer or farther away from the horizon line, things will be larger. The horizon line is also super useful because it serves as a point for the vanishing point to exist on. The vanishing point is really kind of what's causing this to happen, things to go back and get smaller in space. A really easy way to set this project up is drawing a series of shapes in composition and then applying a vanishing line. Let's say my vanishing line is here. And then drawing either with a ruler or just with by eye lines back to that vanishing line, vanishing point on the horizon line. And then erasing this out, having this like that. Pretty easy. So when these were moving towards that line too, the whole composition would be in 1-point perspective. There's one vanishing point that everything is converging on and disappearing back towards. So pretty easy. values. These converging back to that one point, and anything else placed anywhere else on the piece of paper will also converge towards that vanishing point. 1 point perspective. Two-point perspective is where there's two vanishing points. So you can kind of think if you're standing on a road, is kind of a super easy example. Let's say we're seeing this side of this, the corner of this square. And we have a vanishing point here and a vanishing point here. And these lines in relationship to each other are going back that way. I'll kind of drew that out of more like that with the horizon line going like this. So like the corner of a building, and it's kind of going back in both directions like that and getting smaller as it goes back that way. 3-point perspective. Is try to situate this right. There's a point here, there's a point here, there's a point here. And if you think of it like, well, this is an easier way to kind of draw it out. It's almost like you are all the way up on a building looking down. All the way up on a building looking down. Onto another building with this kind of corner coming out. So that should not be visible back there. Ignore that back spot. So it'll be vanishing down. Draw a little sidewalk. And vanishing to the sides and back. When you have more and more shapes interacting, it'll be more and more obvious. Also, as you look at, I'm just going to get on the page. It'll be obvious as you draw it out, but as you develop shapes, where they sit in the picture plane will affect kind of the sides that you see them in. So if the vanishing point's here, you're only really going to see the edge of this side of the shape. But this shape, you're going to see the side and the bottom. And this shape, you're going to see the side and the top. In 1 point. We can do another one in 2 point. It's kind of confusing, but it reacts to very specific points. So it is almost like a more mathematical way of thinking of things. Actually, let me do that over. Let's do this in 2 point. It's going to be stretching like that. And ideally, whatever the shape is, maybe it's like a really long square. You're seeing the top of this square that's going all the way back. And you're seeing the bottom of this square at an angle that's going all the way back. And then you're just seeing the two sides of this one. In a 2 point perspective. 3 point perspective, it gets super complicated, or it can with a lot more objects. They'll all be kind of almost falling into a funnel at a certain point as you reproduce shapes here and here. No, well, one thing with that you can do is mess around with space. I think this looks kind of interesting. It has those weird like I think it's like the 70s, they used to use it a lot, 70s, 80s, where it's like a movie starts and the title of the movie goes forward through space and it like kind of moves in with these perspective lines from like a horizon point. I think that's kind of interesting. And you can do really fun things with that. I'll talk about that without the spheric perspective, but you don't have to. I think that will be a really easy way to create a composition that's interesting, other than just like a series of shapes that are going like this. Triangle. You know, if there's a vanishing point back there. That's fine, but I do think it's kind of interesting when they kind of extend a little bit more. You can kind of exaggerate them in those areas, or you can take them all the way back. Whatever really makes a good image is what I'm more interested in. I would, with the horizon line, you don't necessarily need a horizon line, but it is a good point of reference for you. So you can put that in pencil and then erase it out later on. Or you can leave the horizon and have like these spaceship shapes moving forward. 3-point perspective. Overlapping forms, pretty easy. This is like an obvious thing in perspective, that if I have one form here and one form here, it's implied that this form is closer to us in space and this one's a little bit further away. As you mix up the size, you can play that up even more. And then putting in, well, it's going to knock that one out, but putting in some more perspective. Allows these shapes to kind of be pushed even more. Atmospheric perspective. This one's going to use value, and it can be used in conjunction with 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, specifically 1 point and 2 point more easily. But it's really just what everyone's pretty much observed. If you look far off in a distance, at mountains specifically is what's usually referenced. You'll have one kind of mountain range here. There's another one here. There's another one here. Generally, the closer something is in atmospheric perspective, the darker it's going to get. So I'm not going to color this in. This is going to be nice and dark. This is going to be a little bit lighter. And this is almost going to be faded out. I would fade out this line too for it to properly look at it. And the reason that is in real life is because there are actually particles of water in the air. And you know, it obviously doesn't obscure anything for us this close, but when it's miles and miles put on top of each other of water that we're looking through, it starts to make things look foggy and hazy as things go back. You can also do it in a way that's technically atmospheric perspective, but it's the exact opposite, where if it was like a white object that's going all the way back into space, it's almost as if all the details, all the information on the object, like the texture or whatever, is being condensed, and it's like getting darker, almost like it's getting like sucked into a black hole or something like that. And that's a super easy way to make something look like it's really moving out more. Isometric perspective I'm just showing you this for the sake of knowing. It's totally different than these other forms of perspective, but it's used a lot in like Japan and woodblock prints. And instead of using vanishing points, it has everything be parallel to each other. So oftentimes they'll have like scenes of a room that's kind of cut, and we're seeing like through it. These two walls that would be here are kind of cut away. And everything, let's say there's beds on the floor. And the way that their perspective works, they'll like have, it's really fun to see. Like a hallway, and there's usually like other stuff going on, like people walking through here. Is that all the lines going this way are all parallel to each other, and all the lines going this way are all parallel to each other. And it creates a nice tidy composition. Oh, that's really interesting to look at. But it doesn't have as much depth in perspective as 1 point and 2 point do. You can create depth with this, obviously, but we really want to try to push the amount of depth we see, or kind of the illusion of depth that we can create in an image on a 2D surface is the point of this project. So what can be an easy starting point for this is just experimenting with 1 point perspective, I think. Having a horizon line and just setting up arbitrarily a vanishing point. And then just organizing shapes. Really, they can look like whatever you want them to look like. Let's do a circle. Like this. And connecting them to that vanishing point. All of the edges that you would probably see should be connected. If you're thinking of these shapes three-dimensionally. Oops, that did not line up. And that can start to inform how you kind of want to go about, decorating the rest of the space. These things always look really surreal for me because if you leave the horizon line in, it does feel very much like a desert planet or something weird like that. And that can start informing how you want to draw things onto your thumbnails. Or you can, maybe stumble across an interesting shape and you want to put it through a couple different perspectives to see how that's going to work for you. Again, shapes, a series of objects together. I didn't do it in this time, and I would do it in my next thumbnail, vary the distance or the size of these shapes, because these are pretty much all the same distance from us. They're just going really far back. If this one was a little bit closer and bigger, it would feel like it's a little bit closer to us, which will be a lot more interesting than just these three existing on the same plane, but just stretching forever back. Yeah, this is kind of landscape. I would avoid drawing like a literal realistic landscape and just focus on some kind of design aspects, some shapes. Maybe if I wanted to do, I don't know, this could be kind of interesting. I wanted to have a box with this coming out of. Stretching it through there and then building something off of that will be more interesting. And then, like I said, using kind of a atmospheric perspective to darken that and lighten it as you go forward will help to imply more and more depth through the image. You can use some value too. You can shade in these shapes if you want one of these to be black. That's totally fine. All of that extra stuff is up to you, but don't let it cost or come at the cost of losing your depth. That's really what we're focusing on more than anything else. So questions, comments?
How would, let's say if you wanted to do like this expensive with a lot of shapes without like hard angles like those, softer shapes, how would you do this with retreating? Like if it was something that looked like a water drop.
Like a water drop.
But not like falling down.
Falling towards you. That would probably be more about the arrangement of, like as if you were looking at a piece of glass and the water's falling towards you like that, or?
I guess, yeah.
It could probably be more about the size of them. As you kind of stretch them out and get smaller and smaller, it's going to get a little bit more into looking like the larger ones are closer and the smaller ones are further away, kind of just getting lost and everything. The only thing with that is you'd need quite a bit of value to kind of really render, because of that shape is so organic. It's going to be a little easier to have with organic shapes an exaggerated shape that's kind of like this, and push it darker as it goes back and have it a little bit lighter, just to kind of push that more and more. I think kind of larger, and the more that you can envision an object having sides or like more form in that way that you could kind of visually describe is going to make it easier for you to draw those things. So you might even, if you wanted to do like a water droplet shape, it might be easier to just go with that weird perspective. And I mean, those kind of look like, you don't have to go all the way to here, just as long as it looks like it would visually line up. And it would kind of look like it's kind of flying at you. And almost like in Star Wars, where they jump to hyperspace and all the stars go like, just become lines coming through you. That's a really easy way to think about the perspective. Does everyone have these? Oh, yeah, yeah. The only thing that I see is that I guess it doesn't necessarily matter. That's something to pick that out. I really like the shapes here. I think that would be the hardest part to illustrate. Just I think if you okay. Yeah, I mean, I like the buildings actually like the people in the T-Tech cars, like, yeah, there is kind of see the front of the room stuff like that. Yeah. I think that would work, yeah. So I don't see this idea, I didn't see this project with someone else's. I mean, you can take inspiration from it still. That's a pretty interesting perspective drawing where they're just drawing kind of various shapes circling one point that's somewhere back there more. You can totally go with that. And then, you know, using the value to kind of darken things. You don't necessarily need to kind of have like some shadows going in. You don't really need that for perspective, but what would be easiest is if you kind of darken the background if you want to hint at that going back further and further. Yeah. Here's a pretty simple 3-point perspective image. It kind of starts to limit yourself because the only way that you can really kind of go is further back, as if you're seeing like I said, down 2 streets and you have like these buildings that are kind of going back further. It kind of traps you into what you can create with that a little bit more, but no, remembering that as you kind of add more and more points, that the lines that are going up and down should be going to, you know, for 3-point perspective, the vertical line should be going to the lowest or the highest point, and the horizontal lines, in this case on this face, should be going to the left. On the right side should be going to the right, and the ones on the left should be going to the left point. For the 3-point, I definitely would erase like the lines going to this further point because it just doesn't look very good with all the kind of blueprint marks going through. I do think it's kind of interesting when you leave those lines going all the way back for the 1 point perspective.